A mysterious visitor in the rain. The night had settled over the city like a heavy blanket, thick with mist and the scent of wet asphalt. Raindrops tapped rhythmically against the patrol car's windshield, tracing glistening trails down the fog-up glass. The neon lights from distant storefronts cast shifting reflections on the damp pavement, their colors swirling like ghosts in the puddles. Officer Daniel Carter sat behind the wheel, exhaustion creeping into his bones. Another long shift, another endless night in a city that never truly slept. The radio on his shoulder crackled intermittently, dispatch reporting incidents across the grid, but for now, he was parked in a quieter part of town. He exhaled deeply, rolling his stiff shoulders. His coffee had gone cold, and the heat from the car's vents wasn't enough to chase away the chill. He wasn't expecting anything unusual tonight. Then the sound came, a faint scratching. At first, it was barely perceptible, lost beneath the hum of the rain. But then it grew insistent, a quiet but desperate plea against the metal of the car door. Daniel frowned, straightening in his seat. Maybe just the wind, he thought, or a stray newspaper caught against the tires. But then he heard it, a low, trembling whimper. His head snapped toward the passenger side window, eyes narrowing against the distorted glow of streetlights. And there, framed by rain-speckled glass, was a pair of deep, pleading eyes staring right at him. A dog. It was soaked to the bone, its fur a tangled mess of wet strands clinging to its body. A German shepherd, slightly older, with time-worn marks around its dark, expressive eyes. Its breathing was heavy, its posture tense but controlled, as if it was trying desperately to hold itself together. Daniel barely had time to react before the dog made its move. With a sudden, desperate leap, it jumped straight through the slightly open door and curled up in the back seat. Daniel's heart lurched in surprise as he turned in his seat. Whoa! Hey, what the hell? The dog panted heavily, its front paws trembling, but there was no aggression. If anything, it looked determined, like this car was the only safe place left in the world. Daniel ran a hand down his face, trying to make sense of the situation. Stray dogs weren't uncommon in the city, especially after a storm. But this one was different. It wasn't just seeking shelter. It was running from something. Something isn't right. Daniel's instincts kicked in. Carefully, he reached for the door handle, planning to step out and coax the dog back onto the street. But the moment he cracked the door open, the dog pressed its snout against the lock and let out a low, fearful growl. Daniel froze. That wasn't a stray dog's reaction. That wasn't the whimper of a lost pet. That was fear, a desperate, deep-seated fear. Something in his gut twisted. He knew that this dog hadn't just stumbled into his car by accident. It had chosen him. And whatever it was running from, it was still out there. The weight of silence. For a long moment, Daniel just sat there, watching the dog through the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the Rain Street windows. The only sound in the patrol car was the dog's uneven breathing. Slowly, carefully, Daniel turned in his seat and extended his hand, palm up, a sign of peace. The dog didn't flinch, it didn't run. Instead, it lowered its head slightly and let out a slow, shuddering sigh. Daniel's fingers brushed against damp fur, and for the first time, he noticed something. Beneath the thick coat, there were faint scars, small, faded marks along its legs and ribs. Daniel's jaw tightened. This dog had been through something. The radio on his shoulder crackled. Carter, status check. Daniel hesitated, his gaze locked onto the dog. Then, after a beat, he pressed the radio's button. 10-4. Just dealing with something. His voice was calm, but inside, his mind was racing. The dog still hadn't moved. It wasn't running, wasn't barking, wasn't trying to escape. It was just waiting. For what, Daniel couldn't say. No tags, no collar, no past. With a sigh, Daniel turned off the engine. "All right, buddy," he murmured, reaching for his flashlight. If you're staying, we might as well figure out what's going on with you." He leaned over, carefully scanning the dog's neck for a collar or tag. Nothing. No identification. No way to tell where it had come from. But as Daniel's fingers moved along the damp fur, he felt something else. A faint indentation in the skin. His stomach tightened. There had been a collar here once. Someone had owned this dog, and someone had removed the collar, on purpose. A choice is made. Daniel's mind whirled with possibilities, but one thing was becoming painfully clear. This wasn't just a lost pet. This dog had a story, a reason for being here. And as the rain continued to fall against the patrol car's roof, Daniel made a decision. He reached for his jacket, draped it over the trembling dog, and whispered softly, "You're safe now." But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The eyes that held a story. The rain had settled into a light drizzle, painting the city streets in a haze of mist and neon reflections. Inside the patrol car, the air was thick with quiet tension. Daniel Carter sat motionless in the driver's seat, his mind racing as he watched the dog curled up in the back ***. It hadn't moved since jumping in, hadn't barked, hadn't growled, just lay there, staring at him with eyes that held far too much for a simple stray ***. There was something about the way the dog looked at him, something that made Daniel uneasy in a way he couldn't quite explain. He had seen stray dogs before, frightened, skittish, desperate for food or warmth. But this one was different. This dog wasn't lost. It had chosen to be here. The silent conversation. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, carefully extending his hand toward the dog once more. His movements were slow, deliberate, not out of fear, but out of respect. The German Shepherd tensed for a split second, but didn't pull away. Instead, it exhaled softly and closed its eyes for a brief moment, as if surrendering to exhaustion. Up close, Daniel could see the details in its fur, the patches where scars had faded, the slight indentation around its neck where a collar had once been, the way its ears twitched at every little sound outside. Something clicked inside him. This dog had been trained. Not just a regular pet. This was the behavior of an animal that had once had purpose, discipline, and direction. But what happened? Who let it go? And why? Daniel sighed, rubbing his temple. "Guess I'm not dropping you off at a shelter, huh?" The dog lifted its head slightly, ears perking. Daniel shook his head, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Didn't think so. Looking for answers, he pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the dog, sending it to a contact at Animal Control with a simple message. Picked up a stray. German Shepherd. No collar. Any missing reports? The reply came faster than he expected. Nothing in our system. No reported missing dogs fitting that description. Where'd you find it? Daniel hesitated before typing. It found me. He set the phone down, glancing in the rearview mirror at the dog. Guess we're in this together now. But he knew he needed more information. If no one had reported this dog missing, then that meant one of two things. Either someone had abandoned it, or whoever lost it didn't want to be found. Neither answer sat well with him. The scar that told a story. As Daniel reached for his notebook, the dog shifted slightly, the motion revealing something beneath its damp fur. A mark. Daniel leaned closer, his brows furrowing. It wasn't a simple scar. It was a brand. His heart stopped for a brief moment. He had seen marks like this before. Not on pets. Not on strays. On police K9 units. His fingers hovered over the raised scar, careful not to startle the animal. His thoughts raced. If this dog was once part of law enforcement, why was it out here? Where was its handler? And then a darker thought crept in. What if something happened to them? He swallowed, sitting back in his seat. He needed more than just a gut feeling. He needed proof. A name long forgotten. Daniel turned back to his onboard computer, fingers hovering over the keys. If this dog was ex-law enforcement, there had to be a record somewhere. He hesitated, then started typing. Case files, K9 units, missing/retired. A list of reports appeared on the screen. Most were standard retirement files, dogs that had served their time and been adopted by their handlers. But then, something stood out. A case from 3 years ago. The name, Titan. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He turned slowly toward the dog, his voice barely above a whisper. Titan. The dog didn't flinch, didn't react. But it didn't ignore him either. It just watched, like it was waiting for something. Daniel's fingers curled around the armrest, his mind piecing together the puzzle. Titan had once been part of this city's police force. His handler had been a good cop, a man named Officer Aaron DeWitt. But 3 years ago, both had disappeared. The official report said DeWitt went AWOL, walked away from his badge. The case had been quietly closed, no further investigation. Daniel had never bought that story. And now, sitting in the back of his patrol car, was a ghost from that very case. The question that changed everything. Daniel turned off the engine, staring at Titan. "You came back," he murmured, more to himself than anything. "Why?" The dog blinked slowly, the kind of blink that wasn't just reflex, it was understanding. Titan had been missing for 3 years. And yet, on this cold, rainy night, he had jumped into Daniel's car like he knew exactly where he needed to be. Something inside Daniel stirred. He had spent years on the force, following protocol, playing by the rules. But now he felt like he was at the start of something bigger. And Titan was leading him straight into it, a bond forged in the rain. The patrol car sat idling in the damp night, its dashboard lights casting a soft glow over the silent occupants within. The rain had eased into a misty drizzle, and the neon reflections of the city shimmered on the pavement like liquid fire. Inside the car, Officer Daniel Carter sat motionless, his fingers still hovering over the keyboard, the name Titan glowing on the screen like a ghost from the past. The German Shepherd lay curled in the back seat, still and watchful. He wasn't restless, nor did he seem eager to leave. Titan had chosen this place. He had chosen Daniel, and that choice carried weight. The past resurfaces. Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across his jaw. He had heard stories about Officer Aaron DeWitt, the man Titan had once belonged to. A dedicated cop, relentless in his pursuit of justice. But 3 years ago, DeWitt disappeared without a trace. The department had ruled it a voluntary disappearance. No signs of foul play, no threats leading up to the event. Just a cop who supposedly walked away. But something about that never sat right with Daniel. And now, Titan had returned. But where had he been all this time? And why now? Daniel typed quickly, pulling up the archived report. The case had been closed under a single explanation. Personal reasons. Officer DeWitt's whereabouts remain unknown. Nothing. No leads. No trails. Just a blank space where a life had once existed. Daniel clenched his jaw. It wasn't right. He glanced at the rearview mirror, meeting Titan's steady gaze. The dog knew something. He had lived something. And now it was up to Daniel to figure out what. A message from the past. The police radio crackled again, a dispatch update cutting through the silence. Unit 19, report of a possible disturbance near your location. 5th and Lennox. No immediate threat, but requesting patrol presence. Daniel hesitated, staring at the street name. 5th and Lennox. It clicked. That was the last known location of Aaron DeWitt before he vanished. Coincidence? Not a chance. He pressed the radio. Copy that. En route. Titan lifted his head, his ears perking as Daniel shifted the car into gear. It was time for answers. The streets remember. The drive to 5th and Lennox was short, but every second felt stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. The neighborhood had changed since DeWitt's disappearance. Once a busy district, it was now home to empty storefronts and flickering streetlights. Daniel pulled into a dimly lit alleyway, cutting the engine. The radio remained silent. No backup. This was his call alone. Titan's ears twitched, his nose testing the air. A low, almost inaudible whine slipped from his throat. Daniel's pulse quickened. Titan recognized this place, a sign too familiar. Stepping out of the car, Daniel reached for his flashlight, the beam slicing through the misty darkness. He walked carefully, his boots crunching against damp asphalt. Titan moved beside him, silent and alert, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap. Then, movement. Daniel froze. A shadow flickered at the end of the alleyway. A figure, watching. Titan stiffened, his tail lowered, his body tensed. Recognition. The figure didn't run, didn't hide, just stood there. Daniel's grip on the flashlight tightened. Who's there? No answer. A street lamp flickered overhead, casting half-light on the alley. For a split second, the figure became clear. A man, hooded, standing just at the edge of darkness. Titan let out a deep, low growl. Not aggressive. Warning. Daniel took a slow step forward. Aaron DeWitt. Silence. Then, the man turned and disappeared into the shadows. Daniel's instincts screamed. He could chase. He could call it in. But something stopped him. Titan had not moved. The dog wasn't barking, wasn't lunging to pursue. He simply stood there, his tail still, his body rigid. And Daniel realized, this wasn't fear. This was acceptance. Unraveling the truth. Back in the car, Daniel sat in silence, hands gripping the steering wheel. His mind raced. That had been DeWitt. It had to be. But why hadn't he returned? Why had he disappeared? And why had Titan come back now? He turned his gaze to the German shepherd in the backseat, his voice steady but firm. You're leading me somewhere, aren't you? Titan blinked. Not a yes. Not a no. Just waiting. Daniel exhaled, looking back at the road. His gut told him the answers weren't buried in the past anymore. They were waiting in the present, and he was going to find them. The truth that set them free. The city stretched out before them, a maze of forgotten alleys and silent streets. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a damp chill that clung to everything. Inside the patrol car, Daniel Carter sat in silence, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. Beside him, Titan rested in the backseat, not asleep, but still, as if he knew the weight of the moment. The German shepherd had led him here, to the edge of a mystery that had haunted the city for 3 years. Daniel's mind replayed everything. The abandoned case file, the missing officer, the shadow in the alley that vanished like a ghost. His instincts told him that what he had seen was real. Aaron DeWitt was alive. And Titan had returned because it was finally time for the truth to come out. A different kind of justice. Daniel knew the next steps. He could report this, call it in, put together an official investigation. But then what? DeWitt had left for a reason. The department had buried the case without hesitation. Would bringing it to light only put DeWitt in more danger? Would the people who forced him to disappear all those years ago come back to finish what they started? Titan had spent 3 years surviving, waiting for this moment. He hadn't returned to Daniel for revenge or justice. He had returned for closure. For one last message. Daniel sighed and turned toward Titan, his voice low. He's still out there, isn't he? Titan didn't react at first, but then, slowly, he lifted his head. And Daniel understood. Some wounds didn't need revenge. Some stories didn't need an official ending. Sometimes, knowing the truth was enough. A new beginning. Daniel exhaled, reaching into his glove box and pulling out a notepad. He stared at the blank page for a long moment before writing. Titan found. 3 years missing. Returned on his own. That was it. That was the only report he would file. No deeper investigation. No unnecessary questions. Just the truth as it was meant to be. He tore out the page, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his pocket. Then he turned in his seat, meeting Titan's unwavering gaze. "You don't have to run anymore." The German shepherd blinked slowly, then let out a deep, contented sigh, the kind of sigh that spoke of battles fought and finally laid to rest. Daniel reached back, running a hand over Titan's fur. "Come on, partner. Let's go home." The engine hummed to life. The city lights blurred as the car pulled away, taking them forward into a future neither of them had expected. And for the first time in years, Titan wasn't searching anymore. He was home. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.